Hello everyone, this is Ryan from the ProfitTrailer team, otherwise known as RF Radio, on the ProfitTrailer support server on Discord as well as elsewhere on the internet. In this video I'm going to be going over another new addition to the buying and selling strategies for ProfitTrailer, the Relative Strength Index, also known as RSI. So in this video I'm going to be discussing how to use or how to set up your RSI in your pairs, DCA indicators, as well as how to look at it on charts on TradingView, and we're first going to take a look at RSI on the Wiki. So in order to find your Wiki, go to the middle of your page down at the bottom, click on the Wiki, and here we are at the Wiki main page. I just scroll down and look on the left hand side under the trading heading. We see buy and sell strategies, so we click that. It takes us to this page here. Now if we look partway down the matrix, about 2/3 of the way, you see RSI. And as we see on this matrix, it is used for the full range of buying and selling, normal and DCA. So we click RSI, it will take us down to the article, which it gives us a little more detail as to what this is. So this is a buying and selling strategy, and it is true when the RSI value, if you're buying with it first, when using RSI to buy, if the value that you set for your buy value or should I say, when the value on as calculated by ProfitTrailer meets or goes below your buy value, that's what it's going to look to buy. So this trails down just like low BB. And then when you're selling, it's actually going to look at your sell value, and if the RSI value of the asset goes at or above that, then it will sell. So this aspect of it works kind of like high BB. It looks at or above your sell value. So this is an interesting indicator in that it trails in both directions. It'll trail down for buy and trail up for sell. It's very, very handy and very versatile. So if we look at this paragraph here in the middle, Relative Strength Index is a momentum oscillator. It's kind of like stochastic oscillator in a way. But this measures the speed and change of price movements. It is commonly used, and it is a very popular indicator in traditional markets, and it does work well when paired with Bollinger Bands, but I do have a caveat to this. I've had extensive experience with Bollinger Bands and RSI, and I can tell you that it doesn't always line up where you might want it to. If you're looking for a specific buying region or to buy on specific behaviors with the Bollinger Bands versus RSI, you might find that sometimes using one candle length may give you a different result than using another candle length. So if you're saying you're using 15-minute candles and your RSI gets into the perfect buy range that you want it to, say you're aiming for the oversold zone, which would be 30 and below traditionally. So if the RSI goes below 30 and your Bollinger Band dips into your range for buying on there, say it goes down below a value of 10 on your Bollinger Band, and that's where you really want it to buy, is in those two parameters at the same time. Say on 15 minutes you get that, but say you change it up to an hour-long candle and it doesn't match. This can happen. And vice versa. If you say it lines up really good on a long candle period, but you want to shorten your candle periods, you might find it might not work. Different coins will respond differently this way, and you may evaluate one coin doesn't line up the same way as another one. So you may have to tailor that a little bit. Just a word of caution when using RSI with Bollinger Bands. Sometimes it might not line up very easily, and you might just have to play with that candle length or even change your values a little bit in order to help it along. Just a little tip there. So the default and typically used RSI length, as described here, is 14. That is an industry standard. Quite typically in traditional markets, RSI is used on daily candles, and 14 is a standard length, 14 days for RSI is a standard length used in most traditional stock trading. So it is also used on shorter candle periods, but that's where this comes from. So lowering that number, lowering your length, increases your sensitivity. So basically what it's saying is that when you use less candles for your length, it's going to have more vertical movement to it, and I'll show you that on a chart in a little bit. And when you increase the RSI length, it will decrease sensitivity or constrain your vertical range. So the RSI is also typically considered overbought when above 70 and oversold when below 30. All right, those are, again, the traditional market standards. More information can be found here at this little link, stockcharts.com. I'm just going to go ahead and open that in a new tab here. And as you can see, this article is very extensive on RSI, and I highly recommend reading this, especially about the divergences and failure swings. Those can be very useful tools for evaluating some assets for, whether or not they're suitable for you to trade in. Trend ID, positive, negative reversals, all that kind of stuff. This is very well written and has a lot of information. Another site that I tend to use for a lot of my information, if you want a very basic overview of relative strength index, Investopedia.com has a lot shorter article on than this. Although they do have several other articles that detail different patterns and how to use RSI effectively in multiple scenarios. So bear in mind there's tons of articles on RSI, basically because it is one of the more commonly used indicators. And don't just stop at stock charts and Investopedia. Go ahead and Google this. Get as much information about it as you can to make sure you fully understand it before you go ahead and use it. So if we go back over here to the wiki, we can see the numbers, the values. So only between 0 and 100 will your buy and sell value work. Okay, so you have to have your buy and sell value somewhere between 0 and 100, or the bot won't respond. So I tend to use a buy value of 30, sell value anywhere, well, actually buy value anywhere between 40 and 30, but that's just my personal preference. You can set it up wherever you like, and I do tend to also use a sell value between 60 and 70, depending on the coin. Sometimes I'll go as low as 50, depending on the performance of it, the range, all that kind of stuff. The parameters we look at, these are from your indicators configuration, the RSI candle period, and RSI length. So those are the two indicators configuration values or parameters that we use to define your RSI. Here's the formula. This is a little bit complicated because you first have to calculate the relative strength in order to calculate relative strength index. They are two different things. So your relative strength is defined as the average gain of the gaining candles over your RSI length, or your number of candles you're using, divided by the average loss of the losing candles over the same period. So that's a little bit odd to see here. So when it says average gain, if you look at a chart, it's not talking about open to high, it's talking about open to close. Same with your average loss. Remember, it's calculating this from open to close, not open to low. So if you look to try and calculate this yourself from chart data, just remember it's open to close in gain and loss. So it's the average gain divided by the average loss in your candle length, or in your RSI length. So if I'm using 14-day candles or 14 periods for my number of candles I'm using for calculating this, then I'm going to get the average gain divided by the average loss only in that period in order to get the RSI. So once you have the RS, or the relative strength, you're basically going to add 1 to it and then divide 100 by that value, and then take 100 and minus that full group there. So it is a bit of a complicated calculation if you wanted to do it, manually, just to see how it works. I don't recommend doing this on the fly because it is a bit painful to try. I've tested that and it doesn't work. So I much prefer just let the chart programs do it for me. And I only did that to verify that the charting programs were running correctly, which they usually do. So down below that we have some examples. The default A buy value of 20. If that's the case, then your buy zone begins when the RSI value is less than or equal to 20, as I said earlier. Also, buy value limit must be lower than 20 if used. Okay, so if you're going to use a buy value limit with this, it cannot be above 20, or else, any buy value limit, if you use a buy value limit, it can't be above your buy value, because then it'll never buy. So just keep that in mind. And conversely, is showing here the sell value. When sell value gets to 80, so you have it set at 80. So when the relative strength index hits 80 or above, that's your selling zone, and that's where it's actually going to try and trail and then sell. So that is how we set up your RSI, or how we understand it here on the wiki. So let's go ahead and see how we set them up here in your pairs config on my test bot on Bittrex. I'm going to zoom in a bit here so we can see what we're doing. So we go down here to, where is it? Default buy and default sell settings. And notice here I do have it paired with another indicator or another strategy. Mainly because RSI I've found does not necessarily lend itself to a very it actually works better when paired with other strategies I found, unless of course you're just looking for it to buy in a kind of a loose range. Then you could use it by itself. It's entirely up to you, but I do recommend at least checking out using it coupled with another indicator in order to make its buys a little more specific, and you might get a better buy point. And what we're looking at here is I have mine set up on my default buy value of 30. I have it set to buy just as it's entering the traditional oversold zone. And it's going to work. It's very simple, actually. It's going to work on the premise that once it hits 30 or below, it's going to start trailing and looking to buy. So once it satisfies trailing, then it will buy, as long as the value remains below 30. Or if you're using buy value limit, it's between your buy value and buy value limit. Say if I wanted to use buy value limit of 10, then it's only going to look in between these two in order to buy. Since I like to not use a buy limit on this, I just let it range down as far as it wants to go below my buy value. So if we're looking here at the default sell, it's exactly the opposite. A lot simpler because you don't have a limit, but you do have to pair it with gain. Just like all the other indicators and selling strategies, RSI cannot operate without gain, because you first have to tell the bot what your minimum profit level is before it will even understand how to sell this. So I do have my sell value here set at the traditional overbought range of 70, and it's going to look at that value, 70 or above, in order to try and sell. Of course, once it hits the sell value, as long as both of these strategies are satisfied, it's hit at least my 3% gain level, plus it's also reached RSI level of at least 70, then trailing will kick in order to buy. So now that we understand how to do this in the pairs indicator or pairs config, let's go ahead and take a look at the DCA config. I'm just going to move on over without saving. And here we have essentially the same thing with the pairs. So I do once again have my buy strategy coupled with another strategy, in this case stochastic oscillator. And I have here also the same values. You don't have to use the same buy value as your pairs if you don't want to. I just prefer to do that just to keep things uniform and buying in the same at the same level or the same range. The difference here is that it is not just going to rely on your buy value. It first has to satisfy the buy trigger, just like any other strategy that's used in DCA. And then once it satisfies your buy trigger, it'll use the strategy to try and buy. Of course, it is also going to kick in your trailing buy once it satisfies the buy value after the DCA buy trigger has been set. So you're looking at three things that have to be satisfied at a minimum in order for this thing to actually work. And then your selling strategy for RSI, it's a lot simpler. You don't have to worry about triggers or anything. Just does it get above that sell value, and it meets the gain value, and is it going to trail? So again, three things need to be met, but at least you're not having to worry about a trigger here, so it's a little simpler. So now we understand how those set up in pairs and DCA. Let's go ahead and look at the indicators config. These are the two values right here that govern the RSI strategy. So you're looking at your candle period and your RSI length, so number of candles it uses for calculation, and the candle period is in seconds. I am using 1 hour candles on this, in case you're wondering why I'm at 3600, just as a test over the last few days to see how this responds in order to generate some data for you guys. Also, I have a caveat here. Please do not use this setup straight out of the box without doing extensive research on it and making sure this is exactly what you want to use, because this is a not very well tested. This is not a very well tested strategy at all. I have not gone through and used this extensively. It's just set up over on this test bot over the last few days to give you some values and some parameters to look at here on this video. So be warned, use at your own risk. So we understand how to set this up for the pairs, DCA, and your indicators. Let's go ahead and take a look at the chart. Over here on TradingView, I have the Genesis Vision token priced in Bitcoin on Binance, and this is using 4-hour candles on here. I just wanted to give you an idea of how the oversold and overbought levels look on this on this particular coin. As you see here, I have the first window below the price chart. I've got the TradingView built-in RSI indicator here. If you ever want to find it, come up here to indicators, click that, go under built-ins, and then you're going to scroll most of the way to the bottom. You got relative strength index right there. And just click that, and that brings up this purple line here. This is the default colors except for the background. I did darken it a little bit just to give it a little more contrast for the chart line. But as you mouse over this and you see you're dragging your vertical line through it, you can see the value change over in the upper left next to the RSI setup. And you can see now it went down into the oversold range just yesterday, or within the last 24 hours, and it's popping back up a little bit already, back into the normal trading range. And again, it happened back here on May 28th, actually a little bit before that, several days before it started getting to the oversold zone. So we're looking at May 27th, I guess at 8 o'clock it entered that zone and went down, came back up pretty abruptly when it had a sharp rise here in price. And we did have an overbought condition up here in, right at the beginning of June here, June 1st, and into June 2nd. Basically, the relative strength was above 70. That signifies a possible overbought range. And actually, looking at this one candle, how high it peaked right here in the middle of these double peaks on this RSI oversold area. Yeah, it does kind of almost look like the price action was moving faster than normal here. So that generated our overbought condition here. So also look at this other indicator right below the built-in RSI. I do have the second one here. This is the bot indicators RSI Flex that was developed by Helmy and has provided it here for our use. Notice I do have this same curve, exactly the same as the one above it. This is only one of the curves available though on this. If you go ahead and hit the little format button, the little gear icon next to the bot indicators label, you'll see that you have a candle period selector. So even though we are looking at this chart in 4-hour candles right now, we can change that on this indicator to any of the values that are specified in this drop down here. So this is most of the periods available on Binance. And we can see that if I set it for 60 candles, or 60 minute, or sorry, yeah, 1-hour candles, getting ahead of myself here, this blue line gets a lot more choppy. You can see it's getting a little more responsive because we're using a shorter period, shorter candle period than what we had before. Also notice though that there's this gray line behind here. That is the chart matched candle period curve for the RSI. So that gray line right there exactly matches the purple one in the indicator above it, as you may notice here. So that's a way you can actually compare RSI on a different time scale to the current one you're using for your price chart. And you can see how it might line up with another buy strategy. So if I were to say plot low BV like we were talking about earlier on here. Here we go. I'm using the bot indicators one from Helmy as well for this. And you see I've got a lot of potential buy regions here because I'm using a buy value of 10. And this is using a simple moving average of 20 periods. But you can see here a couple of areas. This one dipped below 30 right there. But this is in the very opening of my buy region here instead of down in this dip where I might want it to go further before I buy. But you know, you don't always get them lining up, as I said, in the potential buy zones that you might like. So I might actually tell this thing to buy at or below 40 or even 35 because you see where the curve here ends. And you can trace this back further to see if there are multiple different points at which that line up in that respect. So that could be a good back test. So that is basically it for RSI indicator here on the chart. Well, actually, no. I want to give you a couple of other little tidbits. There's a couple of patterns that traders do look for on here. Mainly divergences are the most common ones used. We're talking about bullish and bearish divergence. So where the RSI curve does not agree with the price curve. That was what we call divergence. Now I don't see any examples of it here on this particular coin, but what I can describe here is if you see these two peaks right here, there's a big peak here and a shorter peak here. Say your price did the opposite trend of what this one's doing here. If you drew a line from this peak to this peak, it's trending down. Now if your price did the opposite and was trending upward at the same time these are trending downward, that would be what we call bearish divergence, and that would possibly signal that a short-term reversal is coming, that a downtrend is about to start, potentially. Now for the exact opposite, you have bullish divergence, which actually looks at the bottoms of the RSI. Now if you have this is showing it following the curve, the price curve here, so it's not a very good example, but say this was reversed. Say this low was before this one here. Say it was going in a rising trend off the bottoms, but your price curve was decreasing. Okay, so your price decreasing, whereas the lowest lows are moving up on your RSI. That's what you call bullish divergence, and it may signal a potential bullish reversal or a return to an uptrend. So those are two of the key patterns looked for in RSI. So I think that's about all I've got now for the RSI strategy and indicator. If you have any further questions or whatever, go ahead and consult that wiki. Read as much about this as you can. It can be a little bit complicated. If you're still kind of lost, go ahead and come on over to the support server, or even do some more research looking up how RSI works at different places around the internet. I do Google search on it, and I've come up with hundreds of articles on it, so there's no lack of information. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button down below. If you would, please consider subscribing to this channel, and click that little bell icon right next to the subscribe button in order to stay apprised of any updates and video postings that we may have here. As always, stay safe, happy trading, and I will see you on the next video where I will cover the MACD. If you need any help with your ProfitTrailer client, please consult the wiki at wiki.profittrailer.com, and if you still have more questions, don't hesitate to join us over on the Discord support server following the link on your screen.